Okay, I want to thank you for taking the time to stop in and join me. We're going to be reviewing a Linksys AC1200 dual band smart Wi-Fi router. I've been meaning to write a review of the Linksys AC1200 consumer router for a while. I actually did that a few weeks back, and the focus is on security. This is a great time to start thinking about cybersecurity, because the National Cybersecurity Awareness Month is just around the corner. October is the month set aside in the United States each year to observe cybersecurity awareness. 2016 marks the 13th year of the National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. You can check out the official website for the National Cybersecurity Awareness Month at https://staysafeonline.org. and see what the focus is for 2016. I want to clarify up front, this is not a review on the overall performance of the router, although I can also say up front I've been using this relatively inexpensive router. It's available for $49.95 with Amazon Prime. And it's a good consumer router for the frugal shopper. It has a lot of modern features, and the user interface dashboard is easy to navigate and understand. I've only got about 10 devices on my network, when you don't count the router, 2 desktops, 2 laptops, 4 Android devices, and 2 PS4s. The majority of my bandwidth usage comes from video streaming and games. We've not had any problem streaming to multiple devices over the network, but like I said, there are not a lot of devices on my network. Our current internet plan provides 200 megabytes per second with unlimited data for reference. According to the packaging, Linksys gives the consumer a promise about this router. It's easy to set up, has best-in-class security, award-winning 24/7 customer support, and a 1-year limited warranty. It is relatively easy to set up, so kudos to Linksys on coming through with this promise. Their promise of best-in-class security is subjective, but at $49.95 it does a decent job, and there are no current listed vulnerabilities in the CVEdetails.com website that have not been resolved with a firmware update. So outside of the box, my router needed 2 firmware updates, which were easy to apply because Linksys provides you an automatic firmware updater, although it is not as smooth as one would expect. As to the other 2 promises, I've not had a reason to contact customer support or call in a favor on the 1-year limited warranty. Let's go ahead and look at setting up the router first. I've already reset my router to default settings. Keep in mind, I had to install 2 firmware updates when I first got the router. Unless you install the original firmware, when you do a factory reset, it only resets to factory configuration. You would need to install the original firmware in order to go all the way back to the beginning. For the sake of this video, we are not going to do that. I have the latest firmware installed. It has been set to the factory reset. Okay, at this point we are ready to start setting up this router. I am at the login point. I have it set up. I've already selected the options. I have read and accepted the license terms and agreement, and I want to set up and configure my router manually. Once you click the next button and it goes to the initial page, we'll be prompted with the login. The default for this router is to provide you a username and access that is done over the wireless. We haven't really set that up yet, so what I'm going to do is go to the local access, click here, and we can log in. This router, like many other consumer routers, has a default password for admin, which we will change shortly. Once you get logged in, this is the GUI, or the graphic user interface, that you see for the Linksys Smart Wi-Fi. The first thing we're going to look at is the device list. This may not be something you would consider initially as being related to security because it is not under the heading of security. It's a great feature because it gives you a quick visual picture of the devices on your network and allows you to query the devices to get their current IP address and MAC address. Another feature under the device list is the ability to change the icon and host name of the displayed devices. Linksys has provided 69 different icons to represent many of the devices you may find in a small home or small business network. I did find it interesting they provided you about 20 icons to use with the different Linksys devices, which also use the same firmware, but it's still pretty impressive. The ability to change the host name is also an excellent feature because the default names for some of the devices are not very intuitive. This really is a great tool that can be used to help map your network to know what you've actually got running or accessing your network and the internet. The firmware also allows you to highlight individual fields such as IP address, MAC address, host name with your mouse so you can use the copy and paste command, making it easy to set up other features such as MAC filtering or DHCP reservations by device. You'll see this a little bit later when we get down to the troubleshooting and looking at the different options that we have there. But quickly, let's take a look at the features that we just mentioned. By clicking on this device, we have the ability to edit the host name that's listed in the router. We can also change the icons. As I mentioned, there are 69 different icons, so you can represent the type of device that you are adding, whether it's your home computer or your business network. You can also highlight the individual fields, MAC address, IP address, and so forth. There are no computers currently connected to my guest network, so you can see that there. By default, the guest access is turned off. From a security standpoint, this is one of those cases where you've got to weigh your pros and cons. Being able to enable a guest account is a positive thing because it allows you to keep potential prying eyes from having access to your internal network while granting them the privilege of using your internet service. The security professional in me wants to scream at the top of my voice at Linksys for not including the option of providing encrypted Wi-Fi for your guests. That's WPA2. They did give you the option of creating a password to access the guest network, but it does not use HTTPS, so the password is going to be passed in the clear when the user authenticates to your guest network. If you are a small business, I would not recommend using this particular router because I believe it's important to provide a measure of security and only allow users who you want to have access. At the same time, I personally use a VPN service whenever I use an open wireless network and would recommend that to all of my guests. You can edit this, not that it's necessary to edit your guest network, but that's a nice feature. Next thing we're going to look at is parental controls. This is a consumer router, and as such, it will be found in thousands of homes around the world where there are children accessing the internet. Parental controls should not seem like an afterthought, and in this case, I'm afraid it does. The user manual has one sentence about this feature. There is almost as much documentation about parental controls on the box as there are in the manual. It's really that bad, so here's a direct quote. Parental controls let you block websites and set internet access times. Wow. For most non-technical users, that amounts to geek speak with zero substance. So having read the full content of the manual in the sentence above, let's look at what it means for users who do want to enable parental controls. When it comes to blocking or denying access to websites through this router, you would be better off if you either install Internet Filter software or begin using a DNS service such as OpenDNS or Norton Connect Safe for Home. All the feature amounts to is a manual blacklist, which most kids these days can figure out how to get around by doing a search on YouTube. You literally have to enter each website URL you want to block so you can see how tedious that would be as your list grows. Let's take a look at that now. Select the device that you want to block internet access for. Select specific times, always, or never. With specific times, select Edit. Then you can select specific periods that you want to have internet access blocked for this device. Blue represents blocked, white represents allowed. You can go back and reselect the options to go back either direction. You can select it by day and by hour. If you want to block specific sites, which is the feature that I mentioned earlier, you have to enter each one manually. So for example, if you wanted to block access to Gmail, you would type in the address for Gmail, and that would block it for that particular computer. It can be gotten around, so I would consider this a very useless feature from that perspective. The scheduling is a useful feature because it allows you to define specific times and days of the week specific devices have access to the internet, but it's not a very significant feature. They could do so much more with only a little effort instead of adding a barely useful feature. If you take my advice above and use a DNS service like OpenDNS, then you have significantly more flexibility and can filter out things like pornography, other adult-related content, drug-related sites, etc. You can define schedules for individual users, devices on your network, and generate reports and statistics that can help you see what's going on your network and what your users are doing. I'll show you how to set up the DNS here in a few minutes. Under the media prioritization and the speed test features, I cannot think of any relationship these features would have to security, but it may be useful if you have multiple devices vying for bandwidth to stream videos, or you want to see what kind of download speeds you're getting. I'm afraid the user manual is not much more descriptive than my sentence above. It's turned off by default. There's the speed test. It's just a simple click. This particular model also includes a USB 2.0 port that allows you to attach external storage. From a security perspective, having a network attached storage device can be an excellent way of preserving important data for multiple users. I've got both a USB 2.0 external drive and a USB 3.0 external drive. I have not had any problems with the USB 2.0 external drive, but have had minor problems with the USB 3.0 external drive losing its connection. There are several options that can be configured using the settings. You can, for the external drive, you can set it up as an FTP server. Not sure why you would want to do this. A media access server and secure file shares. The secure file share option allows you to create accounts and assign permissions to specific folders with usernames and passwords. When the secure folder option is not enabled, anyone on the network can access files on the attached external storage. From a security perspective, it's a good idea to back up data, but the only security features of the external storage is basic folder permissions. I need to investigate options for using encryption, but it doesn't seem like it would be easy to set up, if at all. If the external drive were directly connected to a Windows 7, 8, or 10 system with BitLocker, or a Mac OS X system, You could set up encryption easily, but because the drive is accessible via the router, encryption doesn't seem to be a simple feature to enable. At any rate, external storage is a nice feature, but I would prefer to see a security beefed up by adding built-in network encryption. As a word of caution, ransomware is on the rise and network file shares are often targeted by this type of malware. So from a security perspective, you should only attach your external network drives when you actually need to back up data or not rely on the external drive as a backup medium. For example, if you want to use it as a media server for MP3 files, for your music, for videos, and so forth, then it's an excellent feature. But I would not use that particular storage device to also back up my data. Now, connectivity is where we really get into the meat and potatoes of setting up and hardening the router. There are 5 tabs: Basic, Internet Settings, Local Network, Advanced Routing, and Administration. We're going to look at each one of those now. Under Basic, there are a lot of options, some good, some not so good in my opinion. Let's start off with the network name and password feature. You'll find both the 2.4 gigahertz and 5.0 gigahertz networks listed here. You can select Edit to change both the SSID and the network passwords. We're going to go ahead and do that now. I've already defined a couple passwords and a new router username for the network. Not for the router, but for the networks, for the 2.4 and 2.5 gigahertz, which will change now. So this is going to be my network name. I can see you, and I can see you too. Now the router gives you a default network password as well. I recommend that you change those. Both of these are not unique. And you can use the same password for both of these. We're going to change the router password. The current default password is admin. We'll use a different password for the router than we did for the wireless networks. Let that be applied. Those settings have now been changed. What I found disappointing is the network password is stored in the clear on the router, unlike the router password, which is masked and can be found on the same tab. You can see that here. The router password is masked, whereas the network passwords are not. In reality, though, you can only access the network passwords when you are logged in as the administrator, so no harm, no foul. I just found it strange that the router password is masked while the network passwords are not. I would also like to see the system generate a random network password that's at least 16 characters long. This would help ensure home users and anyone who may use this router with a small business to have a good Wi-Fi password for their network. I would also like to see you need both to enter the old password and the new password and confirm the new password for both the networks. This is the case for the router, so kudos for this feature on the router. I'm still scratching my head as to why they would set it up this way without masking the network passwords. I would also like to have a way of either changing the router's default username from admin to something else, but you cannot. The default username is admin and it stays that way. You don't even need a username when you log in locally, as I did earlier in the demonstration. All you need is the router's IP address and then the password for the router. Also, under the Basic tab, you're able to set up automatic firmware updates, which I did previously. You can see this here. Make sure that it is selected, which it is typically selected by default. You can select check for updates, and you'll see the router go out and check to see if there are any new updates. There are none found for this router, so we won't be applying a router update. You can also change the time zone. We are in Central Time Zone, so I'll select that now and then apply the changes. Next, we're going to look at the Internet settings. Under the Internet Settings tab, you'll only have a few settings that can be modified. The first is the type of internet connection found on the left side of the tab over here, along with the version of IP, whether it's IPv6 or IPv4. The type of internet connection can be set to automatic configuration. As you see here, we'll select Edit, Static IP, PPPoE, PPTP, L2TP, and Bridge Mode. We'll leave the default configuration set to DHCP. I recommend you leave the default setting of Auto for MTU, which is Maximum Transfer Unit. But if you choose to modify it, know that 1500 is the most optimum and highest MTU you can set for an Ethernet network. You can also clone your MAC address, which is something you would rarely need to do, but if you do, check out the article on DDWRT for an example or an explanation of when you might want to clone your MAC. The bottom line on the Internet settings, the default should work fine for those options. None of these settings really affect your security. The possibility with IPv6 may change in the future, but I have a feeling this router will be ancient history before we need to worry about configuring IPv6 settings on a consumer router. Next, we'll look at local network. Now, this is where we can make a couple more modifications. You can change the host name for the router. You can change the IP address and subnet mask. I cannot think of a reason you'd want to modify your IP address or subnet mask unless you just want to play. There's enough address space with a home or small business network with the default network as it is out of the box. But play if you want to. It probably won't hurt anything and you'll learn something new in the process. On the right side of the tab, you can make some configuration changes that can be directly related to your security. You can enable your router to serve as a DHCP server for your internal network and then define the start IP address for your internal network. The configuration I recommend you modify is maximum number of users. In my case, I can have between 1 and 155 users. The default setting is 50. That's a lot of users. If you are concerned about security, then I recommend you reduce this number to the actual number of devices you have on your network. I'm going to reduce this to 12 and show you how to do that. Just change the setting there and click Apply. Because we're on this setting now where you can change your static DNS 1, DNS 2, and DNS 3, WINS is not something anyone with a home network is likely to have to change, so we'll just leave that setting alone. I'm going to open up another page, go to the Norton Connect Save for home. There are three options. You can select security only, which blocks malware, phishing, and scam sites. You can select security and pornography, which blocks all of the above plus the pornography. Or you can select security plus pornography plus other, which includes other sites that feature mature content, abortion, alcohol, crime, drugs, file sharing, gambling, hate, suicide, tobacco, or violence. For our purposes, we're going to go ahead and just go with this middle of the road setting to block security or to provide additional security and to block pornography. You see the preferred DNS setting and the alternate. So we only need to change two or add two settings in this case, 199.85.126.20 and 199.85.127.20. Let's do that now. So 199.85.126.20, 199.85.127.20. Click Apply. Those changes have now been made. Go back here. We're going to go to www.playboy.com, hit enter, and we should get a notice from the router that we can't go to this website.